On the 29th of May, 2021, in Porto, a club that had sacked its manager 4 months earlier lifted the biggest trophy in European football. Chelsea beat Manchester City 1-0. Kai Havertz, 21 years old, slotted the only goal past Ederson. And that was that. Champions of Europe. Again. What made it remarkable wasn't just the result. It was the context. Thomas Tuchel had been in charge for barely 4 months. When he walked through the door in January, Chelsea were 9th in the Premier League. By May, they were Champions League winners, having knocked out Atletico Madrid, Porto, and Real Madrid without breaking a sweat. They conceded 2 goals in the entire knockout stage. 7 Chelsea players were named to the Champions League squad of the season, more than any other club. And that was just the beginning. By February 2022, Chelsea had won the Champions League, the Super Cup, and the Club World Cup, completing the full set of major UEFA titles and FIFA Global Club title available to them at the time. 3 weeks later, the UK government froze the assets of the man who built it all, and Chelsea Football Club entered one of the strangest financial episodes in the history of modern sport. This is the story of 3 owners, a £1 billion accounting trick, and the moment football finance changed forever. To understand what Chelsea became, you have to understand what they were. Chelsea Football Club was founded in 1905, and for the better part of a century, they were what the English press liked to call a glamour club. Popular, well-supported, often entertaining, but almost always disappointing when it mattered. They won 1 league title in 1955, and then they didn't win another for 50 years. In fact, they were relegated 3 times between 1975 and 1988. There were seasons where Chelsea were closer to the 3rd division than the 1st. It wasn't until the late 90s, under managers like Ruud Gullit and Gianluca Vialli, that Chelsea clawed their way back. 3 FA Cups, 2 League Cups, 2 Cup Winners' Cups, a Super Cup. Suddenly, they seemed to be competitive again. And on the final day of the 2002-2003 season, Chelsea beat Liverpool to secure 4th place and a spot in the Champions League for the next season. The media called it the £20 million game, because Champions League qualification was worth roughly that amount in revenue. That result is widely believed to be the reason why one particular man decided to buy the club. In June 2003, Roman Abramovich, a Russian billionaire with a fortune estimated at over $11 billion, bought Chelsea Football Club for £140 million. He took on $80 million more in existing debt. Then he started spending. Over $100 million in his first transfer window alone. Damien Duff, Hernan Crespo, Joe Cole, Glenn Johnson. And then, the following summer, he hired Jose Mourinho, one of the most successful managers in European football history. But at the time, he was just an eccentric manager with a rigid defensive style who'd had some success in Portugal. Abramovich believed in him, and what followed was the most dominant period in Chelsea's history. Back-to-back Premier League titles in 2005 and 2006. The 2004-2005 season set a then-record 95 points and a still-standing record of just 15 goals conceded in an entire league season. 15 in 38 games. That record has stood for 20 years. No one has come close. The defensive style worked. Everybody thought Jose Mourinho was here to stay, so it was surprising when he unexpectedly left Chelsea in September 2007, allegedly following a series of disagreements with Abramovich. This was the era of Didier Drogba, Frank Lampard, John Terry, and Peter Cech, four players who would become synonymous with the club, and behind them a revolving door of world-class managers, many of whom were sacked within months of winning a trophy. That was the Abramovich model. Win now, win constantly, and if you stop winning, you're gone. 5 Premier League titles, 5 FA Cups and 3 League Cups, 2 Champions Leagues, 2 Europa Leagues, a Super Cup, a Club World Cup. 21 major trophies in 19 years. Under Abramovich, Chelsea won more than they had in the previous 98 years of their existence, combined. But it all ran on one thing: one man's money. And in early 2022, the British government decided that money was a problem. On March the 10th, 2022, the United Kingdom government froze the assets of Roman Abramovich. He was designated under the Russia Sanctions EU exit regulations as a pro-Kremlin oligarch with, quote, close ties to Vladimir Putin. Specifically, the government alleged that his steel company, Evraz, had potentially supplied steel used in the manufacture of Russian military tanks. Chelsea, as Abramovich's most visible UK asset, was caught in the blast radius. But this didn't come out of nowhere. In fact, the UK government had been circling Abramovich for years. In March 2018, former Russian intelligence officer Sergei Skripal and his daughter were poisoned with a nerve agent on British soil in the city of Salisbury. This case was famously known as the Skripal poisoning. It was attributed to Russian military intelligence, and in the aftermath, the British government's attitude toward wealthy Russians living in the UK shifted from welcome to suspicious. That same year, Abramovich's UK Tier 1 investor visa expired. He applied for renewal. The government delayed it, and delayed it, and delayed it again, until Abramovich eventually withdrew the application entirely and became an Israeli citizen. By the time the 2022 sanctions hit, he hadn't lived in London for years. And then there were the leaked documents. Revealed later, they showed that British intelligence had been compiling data on Abramovich's alleged illegal financing and political influence for a long time. They weren't exactly acting on impulse in 2022. They were waiting for what internal memos described as a legally watertight moment to act. Russia's invasion of Ukraine provided exactly that, the political cover and the legal justification to pull the trigger on something that had been loaded for years. Now, an important distinction: the government didn't seize Chelsea. They didn't take ownership, they froze it. Abramovich couldn't sell the club, couldn't take money out of it, couldn't put money into it. Chelsea was legally stuck. A multi-billion-pound football operation running on fumes. But the government also understood something. Chelsea wasn't just a company, it was a cultural institution, home to 40,000 fans, with thousands of employees, a fixture in the Premier League, which itself was a major engine of the UK economy. If the club collapsed, the fallout would be enormous. So the government did something unusual. They issued a special operating license. This license was the one thing that kept Chelsea alive, though barely. It allowed the club to continue operating, but under conditions that were, frankly, absurd for a Premier League football club. Chelsea was limited to £20,000 per away trip. For context, a standard Premier League away trip costs between £60,000 and £100,000. Private jets, security, 5-star hotels. Chelsea were now expected to do it for a fifth of that. There was reportedly a moment where the Chelsea captain considered asking the players to pay for their own flights to an FA Cup match against Middlesbrough. The club literally could not afford the plane. A club valued in the billions, unable to book a flight. They were initially allowed to spend £500,000 to host a match at Stamford Bridge, a 40,000-seat stadium. That covers security, stewards, medical staff, everything. It was dangerously low by every professional estimate. The government eventually raised it to 900,000, which was still very tight. And then there was the revenue freeze. No new ticket sales. Only existing season ticket holders could attend. No shirt sales, no merchandise. The club shop at Stamford Bridge was padlocked shut. This was historically one of the busiest retail locations in West London. Chelsea Football Club, reigning European champions, world champions, was operating like a sanctioned shell company. This couldn't last. Everyone knew it. The question was, who would be allowed to buy the club? The government mandated a sale. Abramovich hired a merchant bank called the Rain Group to manage the process. They received 12 formal bids. On May 30th, 2022, a deal was reached. A consortium led by Todd Boehly, an American businessman, co-owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers, along with Clearlake Capital, a private equity firm founded by Baydad Eghbali, acquired Chelsea for £4.25 billion. To put all of that in perspective, Abramovich paid $140 million in 2003. 19 years later, the club sold for 30 times that amount. It was the most expensive sports team transaction in history at the time. By the way, there was a remarkable footnote. Abramovich wrote off £1.6 billion in personal loans that he had made to the club over the years. Now, what about the net proceeds? The remaining £2.5 billion from the sale. He pledged it to charitable causes for victims of the war in Ukraine. That was his promise. But here's the reality. As of early 2026, that £2.5 billion is still sitting in a frozen UK bank account. Abramovich hasn't released it. The government wants it to go exclusively to humanitarian causes in Ukraine. Abramovich, however, argued it should go to, quote, all victims of the war, including, presumably, those in Russia as well. In December 2025, the Prime Minister told Parliament the government was prepared to take Abramovich to court to enforce the deal. The money remains locked. The charity, to this day, has never been established. As for Chelsea, the club now had new owners. The financial restrictions were finally lifted, but a heavy uncertainty remained. Could they continue the success trajectory defined by the Abramovich era? To understand what Boehly and Eghbali did next, you need to understand who they are and how they are different from Abramovich. Abramovich was a patron, a sugar daddy. He spent his own money, absorbed losses of roughly £900,000 a week for 19 years, and treated Chelsea as a personal passion project. To quote him, "It's not about making money. I have many much less risky ways of making money than this. It's really about having fun." Boehly and Clearlake are something else entirely. Todd Boehly is the chairman of Eldridge Industries, a holding company with investments across media, insurance, and sports, notably including the LA Dodgers. Baydad Eghbali is the co-founder of Clearlake Capital, a private equity firm managing roughly $75 billion in assets. These are not football enthusiasts. These are financial minds. Clearlake owns 60% of Chelsea. A private equity firm doesn't buy a football club to have fun, it buys one to generate a return. That distinction between patron and investor is the key to everything that happened next. In their first transfer window, summer of 2022, they spent over £200 million. Raheem Sterling, Wesley Fofana, Mark Cucurella. In January 2023, they broke the British transfer record. Mikhailo Mudryk, £88 million. Then broke it again. Enzo Fernandez, over £100 million from Benfica. Then Moises Caicedo from Brighton, 115 million. By the end of the 2023 summer window, Chelsea had spent more on transfers than any club in Premier League history. And they didn't stop. Summer 2024, winter 2025, summer 2025. The spending continued, window after window. By February 2026, Chelsea's gross transfer spend under Boehly and Clearlake had surpassed £1.8 billion. They also set a Premier League record for outgoings in the summer of 2025, recouping over £260 million in a single window. But even accounting for sales, the net spend in roughly 3 years nearly matched Abramovich's total across all 19 years of his ownership. Jurgen Klopp, then managing Liverpool, had said it best back in 2023. "I don't understand this part of the business, but it's a big number. How? How do you spend £1 billion in 2 years and not immediately collapse under the weight of financial fair play? Here's how it works. The first thing to talk about is amortization. Amortization is not new, it's not illegal, and it's not, technically, a trick. It's a standard accounting principle used everywhere, not just sports. But Chelsea took it to the next level. Let's say you buy a player for £80 million on a 4-year contract. In accounting, you don't report that £80 million as a cost in year 1. You spread it evenly across the length of the contract. This is amortization. So your annual cost, for financial fair play purposes, is £20 million per year. That's how every club does it, and so does Chelsea. Except, instead of signing players to an industry standard of 4 or 5-year contracts, Chelsea started signing players to 7-year contracts, 8-year contracts, in one case 8.5 years. Same player, same fee, but now the annual cost on the books drops from £20 million to £10 million. On paper, you just made that signing 50% cheaper. And Chelsea didn't do this with just one player, they did it with almost everyone. Chelsea were spending more than any club in history, but on paper, they looked responsible. In reality, they had committed to hundreds of millions in future obligations that would take the better part of a decade to pay off. This idea, unsurprisingly, came from baseball. Todd Boehly co-owns the LA Dodgers. In Major League Baseball, long-term contracts are standard. Mookie Betts signed a 12-year deal with the Dodgers. Shohei Ohtani signed for 10 years, $700 million. In American sports, you lock in talent for a decade and spread the cost. Nobody in European football had thought to apply this logic. Perhaps they all thought it was risky, unnecessary. It took the mentality of a private equity operator for the owners to actually step up and be the first to do it. The success, though, remains to be seen. Amortization was only one tool in the box. In June 2023, Chelsea sold 2 hotels adjacent to Stamford Bridge, the Millennium and the Copthorne, for £76.5 million. Sounds pretty straightforward. A club sells some real estate to raise cash. Clubs do it all the time, except Chelsea didn't sell them to an outside buyer. They sold them to Blue Co 22 Properties Limited, a subsidiary of Blue Co 22 Limited, which is Chelsea's own parent company. In other words, Chelsea sold 2 hotels to themselves and booked it as £76.5 million in income. Without that sale, Chelsea's losses for the 2022-2023 financial year would have been £166 million, which was well beyond the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules limit. With it, the loss dropped to £90 million. Crisis averted. The Premier League investigated. 2 independent valuers assessed the hotels. The deal was cleared as fair market value. Technically, Chelsea broke no rules. And then they did it again. In June 2024, 2 days before the end of the accounting period, Chelsea repositioned their women's team. That's the official language. What it meant in practice was that Chelsea Football Club Women Limited was transferred from Chelsea FC Holdings to Blue Co., the same parent company. The profit on disposal of subsidiaries from this transaction, £198 million. This turned a projected loss into a pre-tax profit of £128 million. Chelsea went from red to green overnight. Not by earning more money, not by winning a competition, not by selling a single player, but by moving an asset from one part of their corporate structure to another. Some call it a blatant effort to circumvent the rules the Premier League has put in place. But here's the thing, it's legal. The Premier League's rules don't prohibit associated party transactions. They just require fair market value. UEFA does ban them, but Chelsea weren't in European competition that year, so UEFA rules didn't apply. There's one more piece of the financial architecture in this maze, and it's not at Stamford Bridge, it's in Strasbourg. In June 2023, Blue Co acquired RC Strasbourg, a League One club, for £65 million. Suddenly, Chelsea wasn't just a football club, it was the flagship of a multi-club network. Since the acquisition, more than 10 players have moved between the two clubs. Loans, permanent transfers, buy and loan-back deals. The pipeline runs in both directions, and it serves multiple purposes. Here's the model in action. Chelsea signed Mamadou Sarr from Strasbourg for £12 million. He's 19. They give him an 8-year contract. Then they loan him straight back to Strasbourg. He plays 30 games in League One, develops, proves himself. His market value climbs. When Chelsea eventually sell him or keep him, the asset has appreciated, all without using a single minute of Premier League squad space. And it works in reverse too. Chelsea buy a young talent, loan him to Strasbourg, he gets 30 starts in a top European league, and suddenly he's worth double what they paid. If Chelsea don't need him, they sell, and the profit goes straight to the book for profit and sustainability rules purposes. Strasbourg isn't a feeder club, not officially. Their president, Mark Keller, prefers the term sister club, but the financial reality is clear. In a private equity model, Strasbourg is what you'd call a value validation center, a place where raw assets are refined and marked up before being deployed or sold. And the most telling detail of all, when Chelsea sacked Enzo Maresca in January 2026, they didn't hire from outside. They pulled Liam Rosenior, Strasbourg's manager, directly from the sister club, on a 6.5-year contract. Even the manager is an internal transfer. Chelsea is not an isolated case. They are the case study. Since the takeover, the conversation in football has fundamentally shifted. It's no longer just about who can spend the most money. It's about who can structure the spending most cleverly. Private equity firms are now circling football like never before. AC Milan is owned by Red Bird Capital. Atalanta by a consortium including Bain Capital. Multi-club ownership groups, like City Football Group and Red Bull, operate dozens of clubs across multiple countries as interconnected businesses. The current model at Chelsea, long contracts, amortization, intra-group asset sales, multi-club networks, portfolio thinking, is being studied and replicated, not because everyone agrees with it, but because it worked, at least on the balance sheet. And this is the tension at the heart of the story. Football's financial regulations were built to prevent clubs from spending beyond their means. But they were built on assumptions about how football clubs operate, assumptions that a private equity firm, trained in finding exactly these kinds of structural gaps, was uniquely equipped to dismantle. Chelsea has been the richest club in England, the most restricted club in England, and the most creatively financed club in England, all within the same decade. When Roman Abramovich bought Chelsea in 2003, the fear was simple. That one rich man could buy success, and that money would ruin the sport. 20 years later, the fear is more nuanced. It's not just that someone will spend too much, but that the spirit of the sport has been commodified into a financial asset, that balance sheets are now more important than wins. And somewhere in a frozen bank account, £2.5 billion still waits, the ghost of the era that started it all.